Welcome. Today we retrace one of the most debated and mysterious cases of recent years. Two young women, a simple hike, and a case that still leaves many questions unanswered.
Chris Kremers, age 21, and Lisanne Froon, age 22, left the Netherlands for a trip to Panama. The plan was simple: to travel, study Spanish, and take part in volunteer work. At first, everything seemed normal, and nothing pointed to what would come next. They arrived in Panama on March 15, 2014. Spent about 2 weeks exploring the country.
El sol está fuerte hoy.
And on March 29th, they traveled to a village in Chiriquí province. There, they stayed with a host family and expected to continue with their plans for study and volunteer work. But on March 31st, they learned that the volunteer work was not yet available. It seemed like only a small delay. The next day, they set out for a trail, and from that moment on, an ordinary trip began to turn into a case that, to this day, still raises questions. In late March, they arrived in a village in Chiriquí province, where they stayed with a host family. The idea was to remain there for a while, continuing with the plan to study Spanish and take part in volunteer work with children. On March 31st, however, the volunteer work with children did not begin as they had expected, and according to reports, it would only start the following week. That left their first days there more open than originally planned. Then came the morning of April 1st, 2014. At around 11 a.m., Chris and Lisanne set out for a hike in the area known as Pianista, a trail near the village and the forested slopes surrounding Volcan Baru. They carried small backpacks, their phones, and a camera. Some accounts say they may also have been accompanied, at least for part of the way, by a dog linked to people near the trail, although that detail does not appear with the same level of certainty in every reconstruction of the case. At first, nothing seemed unusual. It was supposed to be a simple daytime outing. By nightfall, Chris and Lisanne had not returned. According to some accounts, only the family's dog, which may have gone out with them, came back that night. The owners of the house where the girls were staying began to grow concerned. But they believed the two might have gone somewhere else in the center of the village.
The next morning, that uncertainty had already turned into alarm. Chris and Lisanne had an appointment that morning with a local tour guide. Their absence made it clear that something more serious may have happened. Soon, local residents and the police began searching the area, and as the days passed, the situation became more and more concerning.
On April 6th, the parents of both Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon arrived in Panama, joining police officers, search teams, dog units, and investigators from the Netherlands. By then, the search had already become urgent. A reward of $30,000 was offered for information that could lead to the two young women. But despite the growing effort, there was still no immediate answer. Search efforts had come and gone. Hope was fading, and the case was already slipping into obscurity. Then, in the remote area of Alto Romero, something finally surfaced. A local woman came across a blue backpack near the riverbank. It wasn't just another discarded object in the landscape. It was the first piece of physical evidence directly tied to the disappearance. In an investigation defined by a haunting absence, the backpack shifted the atmosphere instantly. For the first time in weeks, there was something tangible to examine. When she turned the backpack over to the authorities on June 14th, 2014, it marked a definitive turning point. The bag was publicly linked to Lisanne Froon, and from that moment on, every single detail inside would be scrutinized. The backpack was far from empty. Inside lay their phones, a camera, cash, sunglasses, a water bottle, and an insurance card. This alone was striking. If robbery had been the motive, why were these valuables still there? But what made the discovery truly unsettling was the contrast. The environment was harsh, humid, remote, and unforgiving. Yet reports described the backpack and its contents as being in remarkably good condition. It was a detail that stood out immediately. The public had imagined a different scene: days of relentless jungle rain, mud, and decay. So, when the bag appeared with its essentials intact, it didn't bring calm to the case. It brought disturbance. The backpack didn't solve the mystery, it reshaped it. Investigators finally had something real to study. Not rumors, not assumptions, but a physical trace. Stored within were the devices that would become the core of the timeline: the phones and the camera. These objects did more than just confirm ownership. They held the final, recoverable echoes of what truly happened. What initially looked like a breakthrough soon became the start of a much darker chapter. The backpack raised a question that would never truly go away. How did it end up there, in that condition, with those items still inside? It was only the beginning. For inside that bag were the devices that would rewrite everything we thought we knew. Inside the backpack were 2 phones. Together, they would become the most vital pieces of evidence in the entire case. They didn't provide a full explanation, but they did reveal something crucial. The disappearance was not followed by silence. According to the records, the first emergency call was attempted on April 1st at 4:39 p.m. It came from Chris Kremers' iPhone. Just minutes later, at 4:51 p.m., another attempt followed, this time from Lisanne Froon's Samsung. Neither call connected. There was simply no reception. That alone was disturbing. It meant that whatever was happening, they already knew they were in serious trouble. And the records show it wasn't an isolated event. More attempts would follow. Emergency numbers were dialed repeatedly over the following days, a desperate pattern of reaching for help. That detail shifted the timeline completely. It suggested they were alive for days after they first went missing. And this is where the timeline begins to feel unsettling, because the phones weren't just used once and abandoned. They were switched on and off again, briefly, repeatedly, as if they were being checked with a specific purpose. The Samsung remained active for only a few days. By the morning of April 4th, its battery was dead. It was never used again. From then on, the iPhone was the only trace left. It continued to be powered on intermittently for days. Not for calls, not for messages, but as if someone was searching for one thing, a signal. Then, the pattern grew even stranger. From April 5th onward, the iPhone was turned on, but the correct PIN was never entered again. This detail has been debated for years, not because it proves a theory, but because it raises a chilling question. Who was holding the phone? Why check it, but not access it? and what was happening during those silent days. The phone data created a timeline, but not an answer. It showed urgency, it showed repetition, and it showed that their ordeal lasted much longer than anyone first assumed. But it also left behind a pattern that never felt right, and that is what makes these records so haunting. Because after the calls and after the failed attempts, there was still one more device to examine: the camera. If the phones provided a timeline of failed connections, the camera offered something even more haunting: a visual record of their final days. Inside were over 100 photos. The first group showed 2 young women enjoying their hike, smiling, vibrant, and full of life. But as the photos progress, the atmosphere shifts. The last normal images were taken at a shallow stream, deeper into the trail than they had planned to go. And then the trail of images goes dark. For a full week, there is nothing, a gap of silence that no one can explain. Until the night of April 8th. Between 1 and 4 in the morning, the camera came back to life in a frantic burst of activity. Investigators struggled to make sense of what they were seeing. 90 photos were taken in the dead of night. Most were nearly pitch black, showing only brief glimpses of rocks, vegetation, and rain illuminated by the flash. One photo, however, stood out. It showed a close-up of the back of a head, hair that appeared to be crisp, seemingly dry and clean despite the harsh conditions. It defied logic. Why dry? Why clean? Why were these photos taken? To signal for help? To document a location? Or was it something more disturbing?
The questions were just beginning. Chris Kremer's blue jeans shorts were found near a river. Some say they were perfectly folded, placed neatly on top of a rock. Others dispute this version. Shortly after, new findings disturbed the investigation even further. Locals found a hiking boot with a foot inside. The remains of the 2 young women began to appear along the river. A piece of a pelvis, a femur, fragments of ribs. In total, the authorities recovered 33 bones belonging to both of them, but the details only deepened the mystery. Lisanne's bones still had some tissue, but Chris's bones were strangely white, as if they had been chemically treated. The official police version is that they got lost in the jungle and ended up dying, but speculation about what really happened still remains. And you? What do you think happened? Thank you for watching. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. See you in the next one. Bye.